She pleaded, "Be gentle, touch me slowly," he said. "In 30 nights you'll belong only to me." She had always been someone who carried her emotions quietly, like a small flame that flickered but never went out. But recently, that flame had dimmed. Life had been hard for her in ways that were invisible to most people. On the outside, she smiled and went about her daily routine, appearing strong and composed. But inside, she was exhausted. Every interaction, every expectation, every small disappointment had piled up until she felt like she could hardly breathe. She longed for someone to understand her without judgment, someone who would treat her gently, as if handling a fragile piece of glass. She did not know if such a person even existed anymore. Her world had shrunk over the past few months. Friends she once relied on had drifted away, caught up in their own lives. Family, though loving, had their own pressures and expectations, and she didn't want to burden them with her struggles. Work had become a routine of survival, not growth. Each day felt the same as the last. She woke up, went through her tasks mechanically, and returned home feeling emptier than when she had left. She craved connection, but it had to be safe, slow, and deliberate. She wasn't looking for someone to fix her. She wanted someone to simply be present, someone to show patience as she navigated her own feelings. It was during one ordinary afternoon that she met him. He wasn't flashy or particularly charming in the traditional sense. He didn't have a loud laugh that drew attention or stories that everyone wanted to hear. Instead, he carried a quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't need to be proven. He observed before speaking, listened more than he talked, and had a way of making people feel like they were the most important person in the room. When she first noticed him, it was as if he had appeared in her life at the exact moment she needed someone who wouldn't rush her. Their first conversations were cautious. She didn't reveal much at first because she wasn't sure if she could trust anyone again, but he didn't press her for answers or force her to share. He asked gentle questions, gave her time to respond, and never showed impatience when she hesitated. It was unfamiliar to her, the way he respected her boundaries without drawing attention to them. For the first time in a long while, she felt that she could breathe. She said to him, quietly, almost as if admitting a secret to herself, that she wanted to be treated gently and slowly. She didn't mean this in a literal sense. She meant that she wanted her heart handled with care, her thoughts respected, and her emotions not rushed. He looked at her with calm eyes, as though he understood more than she had spoken. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep, and he didn't try to charm her with grand gestures. Instead, he said something that unsettled and intrigued her at the same time. He told her that in time, if she allowed herself to, she would see that she could trust him completely. It wasn't a statement of ownership, but of patience. He implied that over the coming days, weeks, or even months, he would earn her trust, not by coercion but by consistency and care. This was new for her. Most people in her life had demanded trust, expected loyalty, or assumed understanding without giving her space to feel or think. With him, she felt a strange mix of hope and caution. She wanted to believe that someone could be so patient and genuine, yet a small part of her worried that she would be disappointed again. She remembered past friendships and relationships that had ended abruptly, leaving her wary of giving herself to someone else. But there was something different about him. He seemed to know that trust couldn't be demanded, it had to be earned. Over the next few days, she found herself thinking about him more often than she expected. She noticed small things, the way he listened when she spoke, the way he remembered little details she had mentioned in passing, and how he seemed to respect her need for space. It wasn't a dramatic kind of attention. It was quiet, almost invisible, but it had a profound effect on her. She realized that she had been longing for this kind of care without even knowing it. She wanted someone who would walk beside her, not ahead of her, someone who would give her time to come forward when she was ready. Despite her cautious optimism, she remained guarded. Every time she felt herself wanting to share more, A voice in her head reminded her of past disappointments. She had to remind herself that it was okay to feel hope, but also okay to protect herself. She began observing him more closely, trying to understand his intentions. Was he truly patient, or was there an agenda behind his calm demeanor? She wanted to believe in the former, but she knew she had to be careful. She had learned over the years that intuition could be misleading, and people were not always what they seemed. One evening, after a long conversation about life, work, and their personal dreams, she felt a sense of ease she hadn't experienced in months. She realized that she had laughed more freely, spoken more openly, and felt lighter than she had in a long time. It was not a love born out of passion or instant connection. It was something quieter, more profound. It was the realization that someone could see her as she truly was and still choose to stay. It was the beginning of a trust she didn't know she had the strength to hope for. He, too, observed her carefully. He noticed the subtle ways she protected herself, the hesitations in her voice, and the moments she pulled back when she felt vulnerable. But he didn't push her. Instead, he mirrored her pace, meeting her where she was emotionally, without judgment or expectation. He believed that real connection was built on consistency, understanding, and respect, not pressure. His promise to earn her trust was not about control. It was about demonstrating that patience could lead to something meaningful. As days turned into weeks, she found herself anticipating their conversations. She realized that she was beginning to lower her walls bit by bit. This was not something she forced herself to do. It happened naturally because she felt safe. She felt seen in ways she hadn't in years. For someone who had grown accustomed to putting on a strong front for the world, this new experience was both frightening and exhilarating. It challenged her understanding of relationships, trust, and emotional intimacy. She began reflecting on her own patterns. She noticed how quickly she had let others into her life in the past, often expecting the same patience and care that she now realized was rare. She understood that her plea to be treated gently had been more than a request. It had been a statement of her boundaries and a desire for true understanding. She admired that he respected that, even when she didn't say everything clearly. She realized that the gentleness she sought was not just a preference, it was a necessity for her emotional survival. By the end of this part of her journey, she felt a sense of cautious hope. She understood that her interactions with him were not about instant transformation or miraculous change. They were about small steps, quiet moments, and a growing understanding that trust could be rebuilt with patience and care. She did not know what the future held, but she knew that for the first time in a long while, she had found someone whose presence felt like a safe harbor in a storm. And so, the first part of her journey ended not with drama or sudden revelations, but with a quiet, profound shift. She had met someone who listened, who respected her pace, and who acknowledged her emotional vulnerability without judgment. She had expressed her need for gentleness, and he had responded, not with grand promises, but with the offer of time, patience, and presence. In that moment, she realized that the path to trust, healing, and connection would not be easy, but it could be real. And that realization, more than anything, gave her hope. The 30 nights began quietly, almost without fanfare. Each night, she found herself drawn into a world that was entirely different from her usual life. During the day, the world demanded so much from her, tasks to complete, people to please, expectations to meet. But at night, she discovered a space where nothing existed except honesty, conversation, and presence. These nights were not filled with drama or excitement in the traditional sense. Instead, they were filled with something far rarer: patience, understanding, and the gentle rhythm of someone listening without judgment. At first, she wasn't sure what to expect. She wondered if these nights would change anything at all. Would they simply be distractions from the pressures of life, or could they really make a difference in how she felt, thought, and lived? She quickly realized that it was the consistency of his presence that mattered more than anything else. Every night, without fail, he showed up, sometimes in person, sometimes over calls or messages, but always with a calm, steady energy that made her feel grounded. She began to understand that trust was not built in a single conversation or a single act of care. It was built in the repetition of small, intentional gestures over time. Each night unfolded with a pattern that was comforting in its familiarity. They would begin by talking about the day, not as a performance of achievements or problems, but as a sharing of experiences. She could tell him about mundane things without fear of being dismissed. He would listen attentively, ask gentle questions, and encourage her to explore her feelings without rushing her to conclusions. In those moments, she realized that she had never truly had someone who allowed her to be entirely herself, without expectation or pressure. The first night was slow and cautious, but even then she felt a spark of relief, as if she had finally found a place where she could exhale. Over the following nights, the conversations deepened. They talked about her childhood, the experiences that had shaped her, and the moments that had left invisible scars. She had never shared these details with anyone before, not even with close friends. And yet, she found herself opening up to him. He never reacted with shock, pity, or judgment. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully, asked questions that encouraged reflection, and helped her see patterns she hadn't noticed herself. For the first time, she felt that her past, her struggles, mistakes, and regrets, was not something to hide, but something that could be understood and even appreciated for the strength it had given her. The nights also became a time for self-reflection. He would ask questions that seemed simple at first, but carried a depth that made her think for hours afterward. "What is it that you truly want from your life?" he asked one night. "What makes you feel alive, not just busy?" She realized she had spent so long responding to the demands of others that she had forgotten to consider what she genuinely desired. These questions were not confrontational. They were invitations to explore herself more honestly. Slowly, she began to reconnect with parts of herself she had ignored, her dreams, her creativity, and even her fears. Despite the safety she felt, she sometimes hesitated. There were nights when doubt crept in, and she questioned why she was opening up so much. She wondered if trusting him so easily was a mistake, but he never pushed her. When she hesitated or pulled back, he simply gave her space, his patience as firm and steady as the moon outside her window. It was in these pauses, she realized, that true care revealed itself. True patience did not try to force progress. It allowed it to happen naturally at its own pace. Not all nights were filled with deep conversation. Some nights, they simply shared silence. They would sit or talk quietly, sometimes about trivial things, books, music, stories from the past. But there was an understanding between them that words were not always necessary. The silence was comforting, almost sacred. She noticed how rare this was in her life. Most people filled silence with chatter, anxiety, or expectations, but he treated it as a space to simply exist together, without performance or demand. In those moments, she felt a calm she had not known for years. As the nights continued, she also noticed subtle changes within herself. She became more aware of her thoughts and feelings, more willing to express them, and more confident in her boundaries. For example, if something troubled her during the day, she felt able to bring it up without fear of being dismissed. She learned to trust that her emotions were valid and that someone could care for her without needing to fix everything. The 30 nights were slowly teaching her that connection did not require sacrifice of self, and that patience could create a space for growth rather than control. There were moments of tension, too. Sometimes, she felt overwhelmed by the intensity of the trust she was developing. It was unfamiliar for her to rely on someone so consistently, and a part of her wondered if she would regret opening up so much. She felt the delicate balance between comfort and dependence. He seemed aware of this, and he never pressed her beyond what she was willing to share. He simply continued to show up, night after night, creating a rhythm that gradually became reassuring rather than demanding. By the middle of the 30 nights, she realized she was no longer just waiting for him to earn her trust. She was choosing to trust him, night by night, in small, deliberate ways. One of the most meaningful parts of the 30 nights was the stories they shared. He told her about his own life, his struggles, lessons, and failures. She noticed how carefully he shared his experiences, not as a way to impress her, but as a way to offer insight and connection. These stories became a mirror for her own experiences, helping her reflect on her past with a sense of perspective. She realized that vulnerability was a shared experience, not a weakness. The act of revealing oneself slowly, with trust and care, was creating a bond that went beyond casual friendship. Sleep became different during these nights, too. Previously, she had often gone to bed restless, her mind spinning with worries, doubts, and regrets. But now, after their conversations, she found herself feeling lighter, more at peace. Her thoughts were calmer, and she began to dream again, not just about small hopes but about possibilities. She imagined herself pursuing long-forgotten ambitions, rebuilding relationships, and creating a life that aligned more closely with her values. The 30 nights were slowly reshaping her inner world, showing her that trust and patience could be powerful forces for personal growth. By the end of the 30 nights, she had grown in ways she hadn't anticipated. The gentle, patient approach had allowed her to reconnect with herself and see the value of slow, consistent care. She realized that belonging to someone in the emotional sense was not about surrendering control. It was about sharing space, trust, and attention in a way that felt safe and meaningful. She had learned that real connection is built gradually, night by night, through listening, understanding, and being present. What she found most remarkable was that she didn't feel pressured or rushed at any point. The 30 nights were not a test of endurance, a countdown to obligation, or a demand for commitment. They were a journey of mutual discovery, teaching her that relationships, whether friendship, mentorship, or something deeper, require patience, respect, and attentiveness. Each night added a layer of trust, a foundation of understanding, and a sense of security that she hadn't known was possible. She also discovered something unexpected: joy. Not loud, extravagant joy, but quiet joy in feeling heard, understood, and valued. She laughed more easily, thought more clearly, and noticed small pleasures in everyday life. The 30 nights had become more than a routine. They were a lens through which she saw herself and the world differently. They taught her that emotional connection, when nurtured carefully, could create strength rather than dependence, understanding rather than confusion, and hope rather than fear. As the last night approached, she reflected on how far she had come. She was no longer the person who entered the first night wary, doubtful, and guarded. She had grown more self-aware, more confident in her emotions, and more appreciative of the slow unfolding of trust. The 30 nights had transformed her inner landscape, showing her the power of patience, empathy, and genuine care. She felt ready, not for possession or ownership, but for meaningful connection built on honesty and respect. And so, the journey of 30 nights ended not with a dramatic revelation, but with a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had experienced something rare and valuable: the discovery that emotional intimacy is not about rushing, demanding, or controlling. It is about consistency, presence, and gentle care. She had seen how trust could be built slowly, and she had learned to appreciate the beauty of gradual connection. In those 30 nights, she had found safety, understanding, and a renewed sense of self-worth, all without losing her independence or voice. As the days after the 30 nights passed, she began to notice changes that she hadn't fully realized before. At first, it was subtle: a fleeting thought, a gentle tug at her mind, a sense that her attention was no longer entirely her own. She thought it might be gratitude or attachment, and she tried to dismiss the feelings as natural after so many nights of careful attention. But slowly, she began to see patterns that made her pause. Her thoughts often drifted toward him, even when she was busy with work or simple daily tasks. She caught herself replaying conversations, anticipating his responses, and even structuring her day around the possibility of speaking with him. This realization unsettled her. On one hand, she appreciated his patience, the way he had listened, and the respect he had shown her boundaries. On the other hand, she began to question whether this emotional closeness was creating a dependence that she hadn't intended. She had entered this relationship, or connection, hoping for understanding, trust, and slow growth. But now, she wondered if she had given too much of herself, too quickly, without realizing the extent to which she was centering her life around him. It wasn't an easy thing to admit, even to herself. She prided herself on independence, on making decisions for herself, and on keeping her emotions anchored in her own values rather than someone else's influence. And yet, she noticed that her daily thoughts, choices, and even moods were increasingly affected by his reactions, his words, and his presence. She felt a quiet tension growing inside her, a mix of gratitude and unease, trust and doubt. She had to confront the question she had avoided. Had her comfort begun to shift into reliance, and was she okay with that? She began observing herself with a new level of scrutiny. She asked herself why she felt compelled to seek his approval or attention. She examined her own patterns of thought and behavior, recalling how she had managed relationships in the past. She remembered times when she had given too much too soon, and how it had left her feeling drained or even resentful. Could this current connection be repeating the same pattern? Or was it different this time because it had begun with patience, listening, and respect? These questions did not have easy answers, and she realized that part of her anxiety stemmed from not wanting to lose control of her own life. At the same time, she reflected on what she valued most about him. She admired his calmness, his ability to be present without judgment, and his insistence on understanding her pace. She knew that these qualities were rare and precious, and she didn't want to dismiss them lightly. But admiration and dependence are not the same thing, and she began to see how easily one could slip into the other if one wasn't careful. She felt the tension of wanting to trust fully while also wanting to remain fully herself, a balance that was proving more complicated than she had anticipated. Some days, she felt proud of herself for noticing these patterns. It was a sign of awareness, of self-respect, and of emotional intelligence. She realized that many people would have accepted the comfort he offered without reflection, becoming attached without understanding the cost to their own independence. She appreciated that she still had the ability to step back, evaluate, and make conscious choices about her boundaries. This awareness gave her a sense of strength, even as it brought discomfort. She also noticed changes in the way she interacted with him. Whereas before, she had been fully open and trusting, now she found herself pausing more often before sharing her thoughts. She asked herself whether she was holding back unnecessarily, or whether this was a necessary step to maintain balance. There were moments when she felt a pang of guilt, thinking that he might misinterpret her caution as rejection or distance. But she reminded herself that true understanding requires space for both individuals to maintain their identities, and that it was okay to protect herself emotionally. This period became a time of reflection, not only about the connection itself, but also about her broader understanding of relationships. She realized that she had always valued closeness, but she had sometimes confused closeness with losing oneself in another person. In previous friendships or relationships, she had given her attention and energy freely, expecting reciprocity, but not always receiving it in kind. She recognized that her experiences with him were different. He had never demanded her energy or attention. It was her choice to engage, night by night. But the pattern of repeated attention and care had a subtle effect, and she needed to evaluate how much of herself she wanted to invest without losing her autonomy. At the same time, she felt an undeniable warmth when she reflected on the nights they had shared. Those conversations had been transformative in many ways, helping her reconnect with her emotions, her dreams, and her sense of self-worth. She remembered the quiet joy she had felt when he listened without interruption, when he encouraged reflection, and when he shared his own stories with authenticity. Those nights had been a sanctuary, a safe space she hadn't realized she was craving so deeply. The memories of that comfort were now mixed with a cautious awareness of the possible consequences. She also began to notice the subtle ways in which her expectations had shifted. Where before she had sought validation from many sources, she now found herself looking to him more consistently for reassurance, understanding, and emotional grounding. This shift was not sudden, but gradual, almost imperceptible, and that made it even more important for her to pay attention. She realized that the very thing that had provided safety, the patient attention he offered, was also the thing that could lead to unintentional dependence if she wasn't mindful. One afternoon, she sat alone, reflecting on her own needs and boundaries. She thought about how much she valued independence, freedom, and the ability to make choices without being influenced by another's presence. She reminded herself that emotional closeness is healthiest when it does not compromise these core values. She acknowledged that she could enjoy connection and intimacy without surrendering herself entirely. This realization strengthened her resolve to remain self-aware and intentional in her interactions. The more she observed herself, the more she understood that part of her attachment was natural. Human beings are wired for connection, and when someone demonstrates consistent care and understanding, it is normal to feel drawn to them. She forgave herself for feeling this pull, but she also reminded herself that awareness and choice were what mattered. She could experience closeness and still retain her autonomy. She could trust someone and still hold onto her identity. This balance became the guiding principle for the next phase of her journey. Despite the inner conflict, she continued to engage with him, though now with more mindfulness. She asked herself why she felt compelled to share certain thoughts or emotions, and considered whether it was truly beneficial or simply habitual. She experimented with pacing herself, revealing only as much as felt comfortable, while observing how he responded. She noticed that his patience did not waver, and that his support remained consistent regardless of the depth of disclosure. This reinforced her understanding that healthy connections are built not on pressure or expectation, but on presence and understanding. At the same time, she recognized that her awareness allowed her to appreciate him more fully. She could see the integrity of his patience, the thoughtfulness behind his words, and the respect he had shown throughout their journey. Rather than diminishing her attachment, this insight enriched it. It allowed her to admire him without losing herself. She understood that true closeness is not about merging identities, but about walking alongside someone while maintaining your own center. She also reflected on the lessons of the 30 nights more broadly. Those nights had taught her the value of patience, both in herself and in others. She had learned that trust cannot be rushed, and that meaningful connection is built over time through consistent care, attentiveness, and respect. She realized that she could apply these lessons to other relationships in her life, not just the one with him. She could approach friendships, family dynamics, and professional interactions with the same awareness, cultivating patience, empathy, and understanding. By the end of this period of reflection, she had grown in self-awareness, confidence, and emotional intelligence. She recognized the subtle tension between comfort and dependence, attachment and autonomy, and learned to navigate it thoughtfully. She understood that she could cherish connection without surrendering control, and that trust and patience were powerful tools for creating meaningful, sustainable relationships. And so, this part of her journey ended not with dramatic confrontation or external conflict, but with an internal awakening. She had confronted the delicate balance between emotional closeness and independence, and had emerged with a deeper understanding of herself, her needs, and the nature of trust. The lessons she learned during this time would shape her decisions in the future, helping her navigate connections with wisdom, self-respect, and authenticity. The final days of her journey with him arrived with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. She had spent the past 30 nights immersed in reflection, trust, and subtle transformation, and she now faced the question that had quietly been building inside her. What did belonging truly mean, and did she want to belong in the way he suggested? She realized that this decision was not about him or his intentions. It was about her own understanding of herself, her independence, and the kind of connection she wanted in her life. She began by reflecting on everything she had learned over the past month. She remembered the gentle patience he had shown, how he had listened without judgment, and how he had guided conversations with wisdom and care. Those nights had offered her a rare sense of safety, a quiet space where she could explore her feelings, confront her fears, and rediscover aspects of herself that had been dormant for years. She acknowledged that his presence had been valuable and transformative, and for that, she felt gratitude. Yet, gratitude alone was not enough. She noticed how often she now thought of him, how many of her decisions were subtly influenced by the anticipation of his reactions. She realized that even without force or coercion, she had begun to place him at the center of her emotional world. The comfort she had sought so desperately had slowly evolved into reliance, and reliance, she understood, could limit her freedom if left unchecked. She knew that any decision she made now would shape not only her relationship with him, but also her relationship with herself. She spent hours thinking about the meaning of belonging. Belonging, she realized, was not about ownership or control. It was about trust, mutual respect, and shared understanding. It was a choice to open one's heart while maintaining the integrity of one's identity. She considered how she could belong to someone emotionally without surrendering her independence. Was it possible to trust fully and still remain entirely herself? She concluded that it was not only possible, but essential for any meaningful relationship. As she reflected, she also revisited the moments when she had felt both comforted and confined. The times when she had anticipated his attention, when her thoughts had turned toward him involuntarily, had been subtle yet powerful signals. They reminded her that trust and patience, while invaluable, can sometimes create a sense of dependency if not balanced with self-awareness. She realized that true emotional maturity involved recognizing this dynamic and responding to it with clarity and intention. She decided to test her understanding in small ways. She spent a day or two intentionally focusing on her own interests, activities, and responsibilities, observing how she felt without immediate contact with him. She noticed that while she missed his presence and the reassurance he provided, she also felt a renewed sense of autonomy. Her thoughts were still her own, her actions guided by her own priorities, and her emotions responsive to the world around her rather than centered solely on him. This exercise reinforced the lessons she had learned. Connection is most meaningful when it enhances one's life rather than overshadows it. When she returned to him, she noticed how natural the interaction felt without the pressure of constant attention. She was able to share her thoughts, experiences, and reflections freely, without feeling the subtle pull of dependency. He listened as always, patient and attentive, and she realized that her relationship with him could exist in a healthier form, one defined by choice rather than habit, engagement rather than expectation. She understood that this was the essence of belonging, not surrendering herself, but sharing herself willingly and mindfully. The clarity she achieved also brought her peace. She realized that she no longer needed to fear losing him or feeling disconnected. Her sense of self had been strengthened through the past 30 nights, and she now had the tools to navigate their connection thoughtfully. She could enjoy his presence, learn from his perspective, and allow herself to be supported without compromising her independence. The emotional tension that had once worried her had transformed into a balanced, calm awareness of her needs and boundaries. In this period of reflection, she also recognized the power of patience, not just his patience, but her own. She had learned to wait, to observe, and to process her feelings before making decisions. She understood that patience was not passive, it was active, intentional, and empowering. It allowed her to evaluate her connection carefully, consider her priorities, and make choices that honored both herself and him. The 30 nights had been a lesson in deliberate emotional growth, and she had embraced it fully. She thought about the idea of belonging once more. She realized that to belong emotionally to someone did not mean losing one's identity, silencing one's thoughts, or yielding control over one's life. Belonging meant creating a shared space where both individuals felt safe, respected, and understood. It was about mutual care, support, and trust built over time, without pressure or expectation. She understood that her journey was not about yielding to someone else's timeline, but about integrating the lessons of trust, patience, and respect into a relationship that was equitable and conscious. With this clarity, she made a quiet decision. She chose to continue engaging with him, but now with full awareness of her own boundaries, priorities, and independence. She would allow herself to share, to connect, and to trust, but always with the understanding that she remained whole, complete, and self-directed. She realized that true belonging was a choice, not a condition, and that her emotional freedom was the foundation upon which any connection could flourish. As she communicated this understanding with him, she noticed a subtle shift in their dynamic. He responded with the same patience and care he had always shown, acknowledging her autonomy while welcoming her trust. There was no tension, no expectation, no demand, only presence and understanding. She realized that this was the ideal balance she had been seeking, a connection that respected both intimacy and independence, care and freedom. This resolution also allowed her to appreciate the past 30 nights in a new light. She recognized that each night, each conversation, and each moment of reflection had contributed to her growth. She had learned to navigate emotional complexity, understand subtle dynamics of attachment, and cultivate self-awareness. She had gained insight into her own values, boundaries, and desires, and she had done so without compromise or fear. The 30 nights had been a transformative journey, not because they led to dependency, but because they taught her how to engage meaningfully, consciously, and respectfully. In the final reflection, she also considered the broader lessons for her life. She realized that her journey was a reminder that human connection, while powerful, must always coexist with self-respect. Trust is meaningful only when it is chosen and freely given, not expected or imposed. Patience is most valuable when it nurtures growth rather than dependence. And belonging in its truest form is about shared understanding, empathy, and freedom, rather than ownership or control. These insights would guide her future relationships, friendships, and interactions in profound ways. With this understanding, she felt a sense of closure and readiness. The uncertainty and tension she had experienced were replaced by calm confidence. She had learned to navigate the delicate balance between connection and independence, trust and self-preservation, presence and autonomy. She knew that life would continue to present challenges and opportunities, but she now had the emotional tools to approach them thoughtfully, consciously, and with integrity. The final moments of this chapter in her life were quiet, reflective, and deeply satisfying. She understood that belonging to someone, and allowing someone to belong to you, was not about surrendering yourself, but about choosing, intentionally and mindfully, to share your presence, your trust, and your heart. She had grown stronger, wiser, and more self-aware through the journey, and she knew that her future relationships would benefit profoundly from these lessons. And so, she stepped forward into the next chapter of her life with clarity, confidence, and a renewed sense of self. She had experienced a journey of patience, trust, and reflection, and emerged with the understanding that true connection is built not through possession or control, but through presence, respect, and conscious choice. In embracing this truth, she realized that she could belong to someone fully, while also belonging to herself, an insight that would guide her in every interaction, every relationship, and every step of her life from that moment onward.